everyone, and welcome to the Beauty in Between podcast. My name is Katie, and this is Gabe. Say hello, Gabe.
Hello, everybody.
And we're recording this on a Sunday, and we are coming off of having a Sunday afternoon nap. So I'm feeling really energized.
And it
I
is
don't know.
Father's Day Sunday too, so shout out to all the fathers out there.
Yes, and to those who have a hard time with Father's Day, I understand and relate to that as well. And hope that you were gentle with yourself because this will be coming out after Father's Day. For those of you who do have a father figure or an actual father in your life, I hope that you sent them at least text or
And
did
for the
something
single
for
mothers
them.
out there too, props to y'all for being it all and doing it all.
Yes, and also shout out to my mom because my sister and I would always give her a Father's Day card and a Father's Day gift growing up.
Shout out to my dad too, Gabi. Thank you very much. Same name as me,
Yeah,
Gabriel.
yeah. You know what? In the spirit of the shout outs, I also want to add a shout out to a really good friend of ours, who I'm not going to say her name just in case, but who offered her office chair to me because there's in between besties. I am currently sitting on my office chair with a pillow on top of it and then with like a thick blanket on top of that because my chair's hydraulic thing has just like stopped working. So I have to sit on a pillow to be tall enough for this. So friend who I'm not going to name, thank you for offering your office chair.
Topic of that. How has your week been going into this, Katie?
You know, my week has been going actually really well. And there's actually another friend of mine this last week who we were sitting in a meeting together and he looked over at me and because I came in a little bit late and he just looked over his shoulder and he was like, "How are you doing?" I looked back at him and I was like, "I'm doing so well," especially in the contrast of having been doing not so well and then realizing that I was doing less well than I realized. And now that I've realized that, I feel a lot better actually. And I'm gonna add a little bit of context to that. Not sharing all of the things, but spiritual warfare and like spiritual attacks, I think sometimes get referenced in like Christian circles, but I feel like they don't often actually get shared of like there is an actual spiritual attack that is actually happening right now. You can pray for me. I realized that in the last couple of weeks that I was experiencing I was just kind of off on rhythms. I think I mentioned it in the podcast even. Like my rhythms fell off. I wasn't going to the gym. There were like I was physically fatigued, but at the same time I realized last week that I was also experiencing like true spiritual attack I just felt like I was in a fog and had to fight through the fog to be where my feet were. Like I didn't feel knocked off balance. I just felt off. And having realized that and then processed that with community, another friend of ours, I met with like 2 or 3 people in a row and then I talked with you, Gabe, like later in the same day. And like I feel like this huge weight that I didn't even realize was there, really. Like I wasn't naming it properly, but then I did, and I brought it to community, ironically, after teaching a sermon on community. And after I brought it and processed it, I like felt this whole weight lift off. And so for right now, I'm feeling like I feel light, I feel good, I feel back to myself. And at the moment, I'm just fighting to be hydrated again, but I feel good. So
Yeah,
that's
I'm
my
also
story.
fighting to stay hydrated, but yeah, no, I think it's been a pretty clear difference from like last week to this week, and like last week was definitely like tiring for both of us. This week, I guess, has been a fair amount more tiring for me, just like physically and everything with my job. Some of y'all might know this, but probably most of y'all don't. So I work as like a handyman, doing like sales and then on-site work, and I've been doing it for about like a half year now. And yeah, there have been times where I've definitely been like out in the Texas heat, but
Mm.
yeah, it's starting to rev up now and kind of getting to those high 90s, like barely reaching to 100. And probably a fair amount of people watching are from Texas, so you kind of know the heat. But if you're not, man, it beams down,
It
especially when there's no clouds in
smothers.
sight.
It
Yeah,
smothers and destroys.
And so we've been going back and forth between it being like a really hot day with no cloud cover or being a really humid day and then some really nice days. So it's been like very up and down all around. But this week has been pretty darn just straight hot. So yeah, excited for the next week and to see, what we'll be doing. And I'm always excited to work on new projects. But yeah, like Katie was saying, the weekend itself, we were at a conference with our church. And our church is part of the Church of God in Christ. And so we were at a conference for Thursday and Friday night, and I had just come straight from work over there. And I keep on like
Mhm.
repeating this to people, but I don't want people to like feel bad for me or anything. But just kind of coming and bringing that reality of like, man, I was super tired, and like I wasn't really there for myself or to like hear this great message or anything, but really being there for other people and showing them like, hey, I'm here, even though I have like nothing in my tank and I feel like I am about to fall asleep and I'm like my eyes are somewhere, but they are not taking anything in. I still want to be there and show that I, am here for people. So, bit of a tiring week, but I'm glad to be back and kind of being able to reset this weekend a little bit. Yeah, and then looking forward to this next one. I think there's a lot of cool things happening, so we're excited.
Yeah, and I'm excited for some game nights that we have coming up. So that would be fun.
Yeah, and we have like more weekends to actually like hang out with couples that we know and people that we've been saying like, man, like we really should plan something at some point. And now that time is finally approaching. Now that we're coming out of kind of heavier May, and now we're like actually kind of
Hmm.
settled into June and going into July, and it's like okay, we don't really have a whole lot of things planned for this time. So open calendars, open minds, open hearts.
Yes. I have no smooth transition into the topic, but I'm just in such a good mood. So that's the transition. We're doing well. Gabe, I was wondering if you wanted to share an intro a little bit about what we're talking about today. Since it was
Yeah.
your idea and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, so today I just want to talk a bit about this idea of like the fear of success slash kind of fear of failure. They're a little bit close together, and there's a bunch of different things that can go into it, like anxiety and imposter syndrome, and a bunch of other things that are kind of like go into this idea of being afraid of success or being afraid of failure. And so, kind of just wanted to talk about that idea and how it can kind of affect our daily lives, and especially kind of like telling it a little bit from my perspective of like being somebody who's always had pretty darn high anxiety, suffered a lot with imposter syndrome, like ever since I was in like middle school or something, or even elementary school. Yeah, just kind of talking about how it affects things and how we can even move forward and being able to change some things in our mindset, and what things we actually can change in order to make a positive impact towards those ideas that can oftentimes hold us back.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you did bring this up because I remember when we were actually just planning and thinking about episode topics for this season, we were just sort of spitballing things, and I remember that you threw out fear of success, and it like stopped me in my tracks because I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
um, and actually, because I had that reaction, it made me think of like, oh, we really should talk about this. Because as we discussed a little bit in advance, the idea of what is there to say about this particular topic, I sort of was picking up on, I feel like the fear of success sort of, and I know that we'll talk about this more, the fear of success seems to sort of go along with a fear of failure that also seems to be wrapped up in and rooted in anxiety. And don't get me wrong, I have experienced anxiety attacks in my past, especially growing up through my more sort of acute ongoing trauma that I was experiencing as a child and a teenager. And I've experienced bouts of imposter syndrome. In general, I wouldn't say that imposter syndrome as a whole, or fear of failure, or fear of success, or in some ways, fear, are really things that I have carried or struggled with, really. So, for
Mhm.
one, if there are other listeners out there who maybe did click through into this episode thinking that you're maybe more in my line, in my camp of you don't necessarily experience this, but the likelihood that you have family, people that you support, or someone around you who does,
Mhm.
hopefully y'all can join me in listening, and I'll be asking questions on our behalf to hear more about this.
Yeah, I think like it's a really um different thing to think about, like you're mentioning about the idea that, some people experience anxiety here and there and have like some really strong feelings of that. But knowing that there is, a medical diagnosis, and we are not here to give any sort of medical information. So disclaimer here, like we are not professionals, and we are not doctors, so we will not, give you any medical advice, but be talking from personal
Yes.
experience. And so yeah, just knowing that with ourselves, like, even just between me and you, Katie, like there is such a big difference between how our brains work. And like for me, like I have been diagnosed with, mental illnesses. And so whatever I'm thinking about that, like, my brain works in a very different way. And I think like, talking about this topic of fear of success, or even, looping it in with imposter syndrome, like it's a pretty tough thing to think about, just because with different things like ADHD, a lot of times people say ADHD is like a superpower. And I think it can definitely like be used in a positive light, and you can gear things around it to like use yourself to your maximum potential. But when we're talking about a subject like this, like it's hard to see a positive, or it's hard to really say like, oh, fear of success is a superpower, because that's not really how the topic can be approached. And so that's why I wanted to talk about, kind of personal experiences and working around it, because it is something that you kind of have to approach and identify that it is there. Um, and then it changes how you think about things. It changes like parts of your daily life, your professional life, your personal life, and all these different sectors in your social life are all affected by this.
Okay, so I actually just thought of a question that is funny because I think your boss asked you this question a month or so ago, actually. But when you think of success, and I'll be a little more specific, when you think of success for yourself, what comes to mind for you?
I want to turn the question back on you afterwards too.
Okay.
But for me, I think like success, a lot of the things are defined by the state in which other people find themselves. Like if I can help, nurture an environment where you, Katie, like as my wife, can thrive and be able to go after the things that you love, and I am functioning in a way where people around me feel loved, they feel listened to, they feel heard, and I also feel like I am, doing what I'm supposed to do, like above and beyond. Those are kind of some of the different things, and they're very like relative ideas, which is something that we were even talking about in the car like earlier today. Is that, it
Hmm.
is a moving goalpost, because it's hard for me to define it by like, oh, whenever I reach this number, oh, whenever I reach this thing. Like a lot of it is defined by how other people around me feel, and if the other people around me feel loved, heard, seen, listened, like all of those things by me. And so if I can help create that environment through the work that I'm doing, like through the things that I'm saying, that's really like what success is for me. So, gonna turn the question back onto you. What kind of defines success for you in your life?
Well, okay. So when I think about like what is success, I think back to my schooling days, especially like elementary, junior high, high school, when I had the energy to be competitive.
Hmm.
Whereas now, anyone who plays games with us will know I have like a tipping point where I can play a game and just chill and enjoy being present, but there's a certain point with certain games with certain people that I hit a tipping point and I am no longer playing. We are fighting and I am competing. But that takes so much energy, so I don't do that as much. But the reason I bring this up is because when I was growing up and when I was younger, I was super competitive. I played
Hmm.
soccer for a really long time. I fenced for a couple of years actually. But my primary formative years were on a team sport where you either won as a team or you lost, and your individual contribution to the team mattered, especially my position because I played right midfield and I occasionally played right striker, which are like key. I have to be paying attention and
Yeah.
running a lot. So the concept of success and winning was really present, And something that my mom and a lot of my teachers, actually, a lot of very often my English teachers did a really good job of kind of shaping and helping to form and mold what could have turned into a really ugly streak of like, I win, you lose kind of mentality. I never quite fell into that because something that I heard so often from adults in my life was winning is good, but it's best to try your best as long as you leave it all out on the field. When it came to grades, as long as you left it all and put as much effort as you could into the test or into the paper or into the assignment or
Hmm.
whatever it was that I was doing, especially from my mom. So shout out to my mom again. Something that she did a really good job for me was defining that success, I say that in air quotes, is really defined by, did I put everything that I could into it? Did I fully participate, so to speak? Did I fully engage? Um, and for me, a lot of the times when I do fully engage, I'm like locked in all the way in. So that I often got pretty, decent results from
Hmm.
studying hard, and then I got A's. Hooray. Or like I put a lot of effort into a paper and I did well on that paper. So,
Yeah.
but for me, even for myself, whenever I was judging, am I successful or am I not? I think the voice in my head has turned into like not necessarily focused on achieving a particular result,
Hmm.
but because I did not always get the result that I wanted. Nobody has. So my, I guess in some degrees, like self-soothing tactic that I had built into me by other adults in my life was just, did I leave it all out on the field, so to
Yeah.
speak? And did I do it with integrity? Which I think is actually part of why I didn't experience as much anxiety around this, because I was less
Sure.
results oriented and I was more process oriented, which I think I still am today.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to mention that too, like with my own story and kind of like walking into how it's affected me or how it's kind of like built up over the years is in that exact way, like same fashion. I played band growing up. I played tennis. I did running whenever I was in high school, or did track and field, and then also cross country. Um, but also like whenever I was in school, like I was also like really smart student. Like, I procrastinated on everything, but could just ace everything by, pure skill, I guess, or just, kind of came really easily to
Test
me.
taking skill. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like all of that, like, I could just ramble on about something, and I loved researching stuff, but didn't feel like my focus was pointing at the right things necessarily all the time. But for me, like a lot of where those feelings came from, where I had this idea of success too, is like, whenever I was in band or in tennis, like, we would have the practices and everything, and then have the real performance. Like, you have the games that are coming up, you have the UIL stuff that's happening. The idea is like, you're preparing over these months and months and months, and then finally, this is your time to perform. And I always had such a difficult time with that, and with school too, because um, I had this idea like, okay, I have the natural like skill and talent, and I'm putting time in, but whenever it comes time to perform, I had a huge amount of anxiety. Whether it was like going to my band instructor and performing like a little
Hmm.
piece of something, or whenever it came to playing these tennis tournaments, like I would just bomb. I hated it because every time like I would see that I wasn't fulfilling my potential, and that was the big word for me that kind of defined my success, and still oftentimes does
Oh,
define it,
yeah.
is like, am I reaching my full potential? It's not, am I putting everything out there? It's, can I do what I was doing before and reciprocate that? And if not, well, there must be something that's, I must be doing something wrong. Whenever I was in school, I was told, like, man, you're smarter than this. Like, you can do great on these things, and like, you're a really smart person. So, like, when it comes time to do this, why can you not do it? You should be better than
Mhm.
this. You're smarter than this. And
Dang.
so I was like, well, I'm not living up to the potential there. And whenever it came to sports, it was like, man, have you not been practicing? And I was like, man, I've been putting in so much time. And
Right.
like, I'm telling you, like, man, I can record it and show it to you, but I just had such stage fright. And the idea got embedded in my head because every time that I performed, somebody pointed it out and said, you have a problem. Whether it's, oh, you didn't study enough, you didn't put enough time in, or you're too scared, you need to loosen up. I was always the problem. And so I had this idea built up,
Wow.
and you slowly get into that mindset of, man, like, well, I must be doing something wrong. Like, why can't I live up to what I'm supposed to be able to do? And you're constantly feeling insufficient. And so I think
Mm,
that's a key thing to pick up on. It's like that idea of, do you feel sufficient for the activity? It's not like whenever we're talking about success, there's a huge idea of your sufficiency. Are
uh-huh.
you doing what, like you said, like with your, how you were able to view things like through what people told you, like, are you putting everything out there that you have? And for me, it was more the idea of, are you putting everything out there that you possibly could ever put out there? I guess.
Good Lord. That sounds so exhausting
Yeah.
and stressful and anxiety inducing and sad. It also, gosh, I wish that we had Dr. Andrea Holman on this episode because I
Yeah,
could
we'll have to
hear
get her on
her
eventually.
saying things. Because what I'm picking up on just in this vein is it kind of makes me think a little bit of like the nature versus nurture question, but for
Hmm.
you, questioning your sufficiency and questioning your almost value and worth of like what's wrong with you, why aren't you executing, I know
Hmm.
is also something that can be um a pretty common thread amongst ADHDers, which is obviously um nature. You didn't Nobody chose or like enforced that part of you. So that's part of your vein, I guess. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like I want to throw out an example of difference, essentially, and then I'm curious what you'll have to say about it. Because I'm thinking about like what's one of my biggest failures of my past, and why did have I not grown to take on the extra weight of being so afraid to fail or being so concerned with can I succeed or what happens if I do succeed and am I raising the bar for myself or whatever. There in 8th grade,
Get to that.
when I was on the top of the world, by the way, top like riding high on 8th grade, I was friends with everybody. Everybody was friends with me. Like it was a good time. It was a fun school. And there was a talent show, or was it the pop show? Because I was in choir. There was a choir pop show, and and all the students, 8th, 7th, and 6th graders, there were like the different choir performances, but there were also auditions for you could come audition as a band or sing over a track or sing in a duet or whatever. And a couple of friends of mine, we decided to play a song that involved, I don't even remember what song it was, but it involved a guitar solo. And at that point, I'd been playing guitar for, I don't a while. I'd been playing guitar for a while. And I would say that I was pretty good at it. So I felt pretty confident in being able to pull off that solo. Um, Not even singing. I don't even think I sang at all. I think I was just playing guitar in that
Hmm.
performance. And I remember practicing so much. And again, I still am good at playing guitar, but like, I was good at it and I enjoyed that solo and I had plenty of fun practicing it. But when it came time to actually perform, this is probably the only moment that I can think of in my life where I knew that I was capable of like executing on something, and my brain just like fried it, like short wired or whatever, and my fingers just like missed a couple of notes, and I like pulled it together. It was a total of 2 seconds of disaster. But the interesting thing to me about the difference between what you're explaining as opposed to the difference of my interaction with success and failure is that in that moment, like the moment of missing the notes, I remember feeling like stressed and like, oh my gosh, I need to get back on it. Um, but the
Yeah.
stress was mainly coming from like, oh, not doing something. Let me figure out how to get back into the flow. And then I did, and it was fine. And like, I remember finishing the song and walking off stage and being like, man, I wonder if anyone is gonna say anything or like if anyone's gonna, I don't know, say anything bad, wrong, or whatever. But
I have something to
literally
point out.
all I heard, oh, yeah, I'm interested because all I heard was that like we did so great. I didn't like lose my status of being the best guitarist in 8th grade, which by the way, I was.
Oh, best
Like
guitarist.
in the choir. But like that's a whole other thing. But like I didn't lose anything from that failure either. So I kind of just let it go and then kind of forgot that happened until a friend of ours pulled up that video and I was like, oh,
So
that was a sad moment.
a thing that I want to point out with that too is like this idea that whenever you do like have these mistakes, what are you telling yourself? Like for your story that you're mentioning, like whenever you have that mess up with the guitar, then it's like, okay, that's not normal. That's not who I am, or like that's not how I actually play. And then you can figure
Right.
out like, okay, now I feel like we're back on track. But whenever you've been convinced, or like if you convince yourself, or a lot of times people convince you that you are a certain person, you're like, well, maybe I do have stage fright. Maybe I am bad at performing, like whenever it comes time. If and then once you start having these mess ups, like even if it's such a small thing, and you're like, I just missed a note or two, like big deal. If you have this mindset, you're like, oh man, like I don't really fully know who I am. I'm not sure if I am that person who can succeed. Then you start getting into your head. You're like, well, actually, I started messing up. Is that actually who I am? And is my real self coming out? And, this entire time, whenever I was practicing, was that kind of like a fake version, or like, all the things were right. But now when it actually comes time, like all of these environmental things are actually like crushing me in, and I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. I can't perform well enough. And so I was performing well because I was in the perfect environment. But now it actually comes out that I'm not actually that good. And actually, these things are way stronger than I am. And so is that kind of like how do you think of yourself when these mistakes happen? Do you tell yourself, oh, this is like inordinary, or is that actually
Yeah.
who I am?
That is so interesting. And again, kind of sad because I want to hear what I want to turn the question back on you after I answer. But for me, and I'll stick with that as an example because it's so obvious. Like my mentality, because first of all, I went on to I think later in that same show, and then also in high school because I stayed in choir. Um, the only times that I performed on stage actually and wasn't doing like backstage lighting or whatever type things, I only ever performed when I was singing and playing the guitar at the
Hmm.
same time. And I also went on and after that, slub, I also performed harder, more intricate guitar solos as part of like um calling it a recital sounds weird because it was for a guitar studio. But like, my teachers, students or whatever, like we would like perform for a handful of people or
Sure.
whatever. But like, yeah, I didn't take that experience and think to myself, I don't think I considered my identity at all. Which I think probably means that there was an undercurrent of like I'm not questioning my identity or
Hmm.
even my ability in that case. It was more um temporally rooted, if that makes sense. Like I think I'm trying to cast my mind back to 8th grade Katie, but also just sort of remembering how I interact with things now. Is that to the best of my memory, I think I really just viewed that particular mess up of like I am messing up right now. And I how do I fix this? And I can fix this. And I think honestly in my head, because I will never forget sitting there on that stool and being like, what the heck, man? Like I know how to play this. I think it was part of my self-talk of I
Hmm.
know how to do this. So how do I get back on it? So I feel like I just viewed it as rather than an existential everyone's watching me and this is the real me and oh, like I can't hold up to
Yeah.
the image or whatever. I think my interaction with that moment of failure was just that. With like this is a moment of failure. And I don't even think I viewed it as a failure in the moment. I was just like, "Oh no, fix it."
It's funny because like I think whenever we were thinking about this episode, that we were thinking about it like you'd be more asking questions of me. But it's
Yeah.
actually funny because I want to ask more questions of you, like, and kind of pointing out different things of how you see
Yeah,
things
then
as a
you can share.
neurotypical person.
Yeah.
And so like even with that story of the guitar performance, like, you have you probably on a stage like in front of some people, or you might just be like in front of the people. I don't know if there was a stage or anything that you were on during the
There
time.
was a stage.
Did you have any like lights shining down or anything like that?
Which, by the
So
way, I performed on that stage before
yeah.
in previous years.
So I think like even thinking about it from my perspective, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, like the way that we kind of like view things as people that have imposter syndrome or like high anxiety is that a lot of times like whenever there are successes, we have a hard time like actually I say blaming ourselves for it, but like saying that we actually caused it, and say that a lot of other things caused that success. And so we
Hmm.
look at success coming from external things and failure coming from internal things, rather than the
Whoa.
opposite of failure coming from external causes and success coming from internal, um, successes or skills. And
Sure.
so even in the case of that, like if your hands were sweaty and you were like, oh man, this light's kind of beaming down, like it's a little hard to see. My hands feel a little sweaty, and so you're like, oh, I missed a couple. Like it's probably just because my hands are sweaty. Like I gotta warm up, gotta get into the groove of things.
Mhm.
Maybe I didn't get to warm up enough or anything like that. Like you're able to kind of say those things of like, oh, it's because of this, or maybe it's because hey, I haven't played this guitar in a couple weeks, or the guitar was like a little bit out of tune. Maybe like you got a cut in your finger. Like there could be all sorts of things that could cause you to be like, oh, I flubbed up a little bit.
I got distracted. Honestly, I
Yeah,
like thinking about it. I really think it's like it's not even any of those. It's just like no. I'm pretty sure I just got distracted of like taking in the audience and the lights and my place and playing all at the same time. It was like, oops, I forgot to
yeah.
play two notes.
And so you just get overwhelmed because there's so many external things happening, right?
Right.
You're like, whoa, that's a lot. But from the mindset, yeah, coming from the place of somebody who has imposter syndrome, a lot of times you'll look at those external things as reasons for possible success. So you might instead look back at the times that you practiced. You're like, man, I was super good in practice. That must have been because there was no light on me. That must have been because my hands were dry and because I was in all these perfect conditions, and so you blame
Mm.
those external, or you put the responsibility of your success on those external things and say, oh man, well I was succeeding because I had the perfect guitar. Had the ability to practice for so long, and I listened to the song multiple times, and whenever you have success, then you're like, it's only because of these reasons, these things that happened or that are happening around me. But when you fail, you say, oh man, like the reason that I failed was because I didn't practice enough. I was too distracted. I was scared. I was afraid. And you start labeling yourself as these things. And so there's a perpetuation, a circular motion where you become a little bit blind to the different things and how they can actually like hurt you during times, and that the things outside of you aren't the only reason that you're succeeding. But we have a hard time seeing that because we're so focused on ourselves being the problem.
Okay. So with all of that, taking all of that into account, and sort of what you said earlier about, what comes to mind for you when you're considering success, what is success, what does it look like, and all of this. I want to sort of give you the space again to dig a little more into like where does the fear of success come in? Because we could have just started this episode
Hmm.
with just talking about anxiety and performance, or we could have just talked about a fear of failure or something. But what I'm really interested in, and I'm sure many others are, and those who have experienced it are probably very interested, is
Yeah.
where does the fear part come in as far as with the conversation around success specifically?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things with it is, like I said, you kind of beginning to tell yourself who you are, or let other things tell you who you are, and why you succeed, why you fail, and different things like that.
Mm.
And so whenever you get into a position where you're like, okay, well, I have something coming up where whether it's like a big deal that's coming up for like a sale or something, or you're going to be talking to somebody that you're trying to raise support from, and you have a big grant, or if you're just talking to your parents about something and like a potential idea that you have, that whenever these like opportunities come up, you prepare for them, do everything you can, and it starts to get into your head of like, man, well, if I do this successfully, man, if I do show up at my job and I make this huge sale, then there might be more responsibility on my hands. Like, what if this person that I sell to, like, what if I did a pretty good job with them and they decide to buy, and then suddenly I have 10 other people telling me or asking me, like, hey, this person referred me out to you. I'd love to talk to you. Like, man, you helped them out so much. I'd love to be helped like that too. And you're like, man, like, I did really well in that, but I don't know if I could keep that up. And so the
Right.
success that you had, we have a hard time seeing if we can actually reciprocate it because it feels like an exception because everything was perfect and because I was lucky. I said the right thing, but I didn't even know that that was actually the right thing to say. It wasn't logical. I just kind of threw it out there. I got lucky. It was like a one-off thing. And so whenever all these different
Right.
opportunities come up, or if there's like a chance to be a manager, for instance, of your
Hmm.
of your section in
Wherever
the
you
in the
are.
store or
Yeah.
something, if you have an opportunity to become a director or something, then you're like, whoa, like I was able to do it myself, but if I get up to there, like even if you've been doing the work the whole time, like even if you've been basically living as if you were that person already, man, now that I'll have the title, like everybody's going to expect all these things from me, and I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can live up to that. And so I think like some people they get scared of like, oh man, whenever I hit the mountaintop, like is anything going to be as good as that? But for us, it's like when I hit that mountaintop, am I going to be able to actually like sustain that? I I don't think I was the person fit for the job to begin with. I don't know how I got here. Because that's the amazing thing is like
Right.
God blesses us, but there's sometimes whenever we're blessed, we're like, whoa, what am I supposed to do now? Like I've got the blessing, but how am I actually going to like maintain the blessing? How am I going to
How do
be
I
a good
hold it?
steward? And I
Hmm.
feel like I'm gonna fail now that I have all these things like like all the things that I've been waiting for and saying, man, like that would be awesome if this happens. Then it finally comes and you're like, wait a second, I don't think I got this.
Man. So, okay, I want to like throw some of this back at you. But from what I'm hearing and processing. So it's like what I'm hearing is that when it comes to fear of success, it's almost fear of the state of experiencing success because you then are put in a state where it's more of a fear of ability to execute
Mhm.
again.
It's a fear
And
of being successful.
right, because it's a fear of being successful. This is a question. It's a fear of being successful because if you are seen as succeeding or having been successful, and if you are interpreting that moment of success and that moment of being able to execute as being the exception, then you're stressed because you don't necessarily feel like you are the one who has
Mhm.
experienced success. It's more like you like fell into
Yeah, it was
it
like I was right place,
accidentally.
right time.
Right. Which I was wondering if I was going to wind up preaching a little bit on this episode, which is absurd. And I don't mean that in like a flippant way. I mean that like by definition, that is absurdity of especially if you just another dear friend of ours, we talked a lot about collecting data points for different relationships. If at some point you have accidentally or it's been the exception that you have succeeded or that you have performed even exactly what you were supposed to perform and that you've executed in the exact way that you were supposed to execute. If you have enough data points that say you can execute and are turning around and dismissing them at every instance, at some point, that's not just a dismissal of your own abilities or your own talent or your own, anything. At
Mhm.
some point, that then becomes a dismissal of God. Like,
Mhm.
it's if you continue to dismiss the talents and the wirings and the actual abilities that God has built into you and or has like put you in spaces to sharpen and grow and learn it's certain and specific abilities. If you keep denying them and just continue to say, "Oh no, 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 this isn't me. This is just right time, right place. It was accidental." or it was the weather, or
Yeah, it's
Mars
like,
was in retrograde.
yeah, I'm
Like,
looking at this book and I've succeeded 100 times. I don't think I could do 101 though.
right.
You
We're
know?
like, statistically, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
Like, at some
Sorry, I love
point,
using
that
physical things.
becomes ADHD.
Yeah, everybody.
But at some point, that becomes disrespectful to the Lord. And it's a great example of being disrespectful to the Lord, because you are disrespecting the way in which he has made you to bear his image on earth. Like, dang. And it also, I think, overlaps with the sort of, not the same. It reminds me of conversations around like that false humility, where
Yeah.
if somebody gives you a compliment about, like, oh wow, you're such a great singer, which you are, you have a great voice, and if you just continue to dismiss and never actually accept just somebody complimenting you on having a nice voice just for the sake of trying to be humble, like, at some
Got
point
one
you're
more
not
thing
being
with that too.
humble. You're dismissing
Yeah.
the Lord of how he's built you.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I'm
you're
done.
not allowing people to actually compliment you. You're just kind of
Right.
every single time that's coming in, you're just brushing it off. And so like
Right.
you can't
So,
even be blessed in that way either.
right, you're denying them blessing
Yeah.
you. It's like when we offer to pay for lunch for people and they say no. Like, we offered
Yeah, it's like take
because
the
we meant
compliment.
it.
Just take it.
Yeah.
Even if you don't
So,
necessarily believe that you are, I'm here and I'm saying you are. You
right.
have this one perspective, but that's a tough thing is you get so locked into a mindset and what you have been told, what you hear, and it's an echo chamber. And so when other people come in, you're like, well, they
Yes.
just don't know. They don't know the full picture. They don't know the full story. And if they did, they wouldn't be saying that.
Right. And I think at that point, it's also, oh, wow. Okay. So it's not just denying and dismissing the Lord, which is egregious. It is also choosing to not trust the people around you, the people around you, or the stats, or the KPIs, or all of the above, saying, like, on paper or even in meetings of, I'm just going to use you for an example. If your boss is telling you, wow, Gabe, you accomplished that job really well, or you closed that sale really well, that's great, go do it again, or whatever. Like, if at some point you are dismissing him telling you that you succeeded and that you did a good job and that he's giving you really specific feedback, you're also not believing or trusting him. You're not listening to community.
It's difficult because we get locked into a sense of, man, like people don't really know what's going on behind the closed doors and don't know what's going on inside of my head. And
Right.
so you say like, oh, like they think I'm a really nice person, but behind closed doors, like sometimes I, scoff whenever people get in front of me in traffic. And it's like, it doesn't change who you are, but you get this
Right.
idea of like, man, these people don't really know me because in the past, people have sort of known you or you felt like they knew you, and then they told you who you were. And so whenever new people come into your life, you've already heard who you are from these people that knew you since you were born. And so, those people who have, my mom, my dad, my family members, my, best friend or like old best friend, my ex, like they know me way better than this person. So, what they're saying is more true. And then you just accept that as the truth and you don't really think about like, actually, I'm changing as a person. Like whenever we're
Right.
thinking about our idea of success, like most people will say like, I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm like doing something new or whatever it might be. But for
I
most
say
of
that.
us, yeah, for most of us, if you asked us what our definition of success would be, we would say I'm learning and I'm growing. Or you would say I'm growing to be a better this. I'm growing to be a better that. I'm
Right.
growing in, being better at working out. We all want to grow in some way. So the fact that we consistently deny that there is any growth happening is just a denial of who we are as humans in general. Like the Lord
Yes.
has made us to grow. We are made to create. And so
Yes.
if we as humans are meant to create and been made by the creator, then he is creating something in us too. So we have such a
Ooh.
hard time believing that and forget that there is creation happening in our midst. And we think,
Ooh.
oh, I already know who I am. And that's never changed. And then another thing too that I wanted to point out, which is what I was like trying to like, I wanted to at least
Ugh.
like put my finger up for it.
If we were in person, I would throw something at you. That's good.
Another thing that I really wanted to point out too is like, whenever we're thinking about this, we don't see ourselves as people that are growing. So like, for instance, whenever we have the success, like we also think like, man, I didn't work for it. Like if I have a really great sale, it's like, oh man, you like, this is so much that you brought in, like awesome job, Gabe, or awesome job, Katie, or
Right.
whatever it might be. Like awesome job, listener. Awesome job to you. We love you.
Yeah, good job, bestie.
Um,
You did it.
you might say like, well, it was easy. Like, you know, I just used, like this sort of thing, and I already knew that, so it's not even like that huge of a deal. It was pretty easy, and so you just kind of put that out there, but it's like, no, man, like, you worked for this. Just because you learned something and you applied it and it worked, doesn't mean you
Hmm.
didn't work for it. You obviously had to spend the time learning how to do that and practicing, and that's what led you to the success now. It's not just natural talent that got you here. You've been growing and you've been doing things. So when that success comes, don't just say, oh, well, I was supposed to get that anyways. Like, no, the reason that you're getting it in the first place is because you've built something and you've learned something. So, yeah, I would just say that get out of your own head. Get out of your own head. Whenever people are talking about this, actually think about it. Think, actually, this person said that I'm a pretty nice person, or that they really feel hurt by me. Is it actually true? Like, just think about it as a possibility. Maybe even write it down, or even talk to yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm a good person. And if you don't
Ooh,
feel like it, or you think that you are that person yet, you are building towards there. So believe that that can happen. That the Lord can, like Katie was saying, He can build something, and don't deny the Lord's strength in that.
ooh. Preach, Brother Gabriel. Ah, that's good. And okay, one more thought, and then I'll just leave it for you to share whatever else. Is that everything that you just said? I mean, one, it makes me think of it's choosing to live in a growth mentality as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to I don't remember what the other one is called, other than just like static mentality. I don't know what the actual word
It's a
for
good
it. But
question.
one, it's stepping into
Somebody could tell
a
us.
growth mentality. Because I think this is the other problem with what you're describing, other than it being very stressful
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of weight that the Lord did not tell us to take on, is that there also is an inherent assumption you're going to arrive at some point where you have suddenly figured it all out. And not just figured it all out, but accomplished all of it, whatever it is. Which, let me just say this now clearly, that is a lie straight from the pit of hell. There is no point on this side of Jesus's return where any human can say with sound mind and sound reasoning that they have truly figured it all out. I think there's a point of you can say that you've arrived when you have figured out that you're never going to figure it all out.
That's
I
what I said
think
in my
that's a
word
good
this morning
point.
too.
What? Oh, yeah. Oh, right. You read out
Yeah.
of Philippians. That was a really good
Yeah, not that
verse.
I've taken hold of it, but I, make every effort to grab hold of it whenever
Praise the
Paul's
Lord.
talking
You
about it.
remembered
It's
it.
funny.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is exactly it. I was actually going to bring it up, so I'm glad that you did. But it's choosing to live out of and acknowledge a growth mentality. Also, this is what sanctification is. And again, I think, the church, capital C, we can do better. And better is a problematic word as a measurement, but I think there's growth to be done in the church teaching about what sanctification means, what it actually looks like, what it is when you embody it. So I think a lot of what we're talking about here is also a degree of acknowledging that we are beings who are constantly growing. There's always something to be learned and to take in from a multitude of voices. And there is a constant state of sanctification. I'll throw this out real quickly for like a sort of framework of sorts that in the Bible, as far as the English translation goes, you see the word salvation a lot. Sometimes you see sanctification, but the root words of what salvation is being translated from, there are three. salvations. And stick with me if you haven't heard of this before. There's justification, like the singular point, so to speak, of when you were saved, which we can talk about that a whole other day because I don't remember a single point. I just, as far as I know, have always been saved. But there's the concept of a beginning, essentially, of justification. And then there is a concept of future glorification that Jesus Christ makes and enables and bridges a way for us to get to that point with his Father in the redeemed heaven and earth and the new creation that he's building, when we get to fully participate and be present and be embodied in that future space. And then there's everything in between. There's that beginning point, and then there's that glorification, like reward future point. Everything in between that is sanctification, which is an ongoing building, pruning, disciplining, learning process. Like, just as Christians, the idea of essentially living out of a growth mindset and acknowledging that we are always being sanctified because we haven't arrived. We're not glorified yet. We're still living in broken bodies where I have a herniated disc at the age of 28. Like, we have not arrived. I am not living in a glorified body existence, etc. Which means the Lord is continuing to do work in me. The phrase of like, he's not done with you yet, I think gets thrown around a lot. Sometimes well, sometimes not. But like, there's a very real sense that he is not done with any of us yet.
Yeah.
Because we haven't reached glory yet. There's so much left to grow in. So that's the end of sermon net.
Yeah, a little sermonette. I hear you. Yeah, I just really wanted to close out with the scripture now that I was thinking about it. And so, yeah, that word comes out of Philippians 3:12, where Paul's talking. And he says, "Not that I've already obtained all this," talking about the power of the resurrection, "or I've already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself to yet have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining forward what is ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus." So we are constantly growing. We're got to make an effort. But if you're making that effort, see yourself. Let yourself, be complimented in all these different things. And then also, with that, yeah, just really challenge yourself to let these things in, and to know that the Lord is working, and he will continue to do so. That whenever you're awarded that position or something, or you get into that place, you're going to keep doing what you are. Just because, even if you do fail, even if you get up there and you get the position and then you mess up, you fail, there are other chances, and there are chances to bounce back. And even if you do, if everything falls down, you lose your position and everything, like, as long as you ain't arrested and got a felony or something, and even if you do, there's a chance to bounce back. But even within the company, if you end up, falling down, you could see about going somewhere else, and you still have those skills. Just because you fell down and you failed doesn't mean you lost everything.
Yes.
Just because we tried and we failed doesn't mean we lost. There is still a chance to go forward and succeed, and to use the things that you have learned from this, attempt in this opportunity. I think, failure carries a lot of weight with it, and sometimes we put that on too many things. So know that even if you do fail, or even if you do mess up, we're humans. That's gonna happen. And I think people have an understanding around us that, even if you mess up at some point, they know who you are. They know what your character is. And so they will be reminded of that isn't you. That isn't you at all times. And you need to remember that as well. But yeah, just appreciate everybody listening to this. And yeah, that would be what we would leave you with today.
Wait, I have one more thing.
Okay. One more thing.
Final invitation, and then I'll give it back. Is that one, to add to what you just shared? We are more. Every individual is more than just the accumulation of your successes or your failures.
Mm-hmm.
You are an image bearer child of God who was created on purpose with a purpose, and the same God who knows the multitude of every star in all of creation, which is a lot and well beyond comprehension, knows every hair on your head and knows your name and knows who he created you to be, who he is forming you into, and he knows your path. Like, he knows. So you are so much more than your successes and your failures, and that is not how our God defines you. So the invitation that I have, particularly for those of you who do identify more with this struggle and weight, the invitation is to hand it over to our Father, because that's not how he defines you. He has declared you valuable, worthy, and a human, and his imago Dei, who has dignity inherently.
Yeah.
So that's the invitation, is to hand over the weight and to pick up the dignity that he has declared over you, simply because of who you are in him.
Thank you for that, Katie. I was even looking at you whenever you're saying that. I was like, okay, I gotta look up the camera. Because yeah, I mean, yeah, just remember that that you are not these wrongs and rights, and you're not looking at a scale. You don't need to look at a scale every single day. We know that we have skills, we have characters, we're learning, and that God has put pieces of his character within us. Each of us can be used in a different way to show a different part of who God is. And so use those things. We're all special. We all got something in us, and believe it. So I'll just leave you all with that, and appreciate all of y'all listening to the Beauty in Between today. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for joining us today.
Peace out. Bye,
See ya.
everyone.
Love y'all.